Hello and welcome to this lecture on the structure of a Django application. It's a little early to be going through all the detail, and there'll be some things that we're not really going to understand until a little bit later in the course. But I wanted to sort of show you the lay of the land so that as we add features, you realize that there's sort of a method to the madness. And so Django is a way of building web applications. Django has a pattern within itself that it organizes folders in a certain way and puts files in certain places. And we're going to build these projects and applications, and you're like, why are these things organized the way they are? Well, it has to do with the fact that if you go from one Django project to another Django project, you can fit right in and understand how things are going to work. So the important terminology that's, a bit frustrating is there is projects and applications. And from Django has this notion of you have applications, and you might have a project, which is really basically a website, and then some applications. But if you had two projects, you could share applications between them. And so it's one or more applications per project, with the ability to potentially reuse a application across multiple projects. And so we're going to work with my DJ4E samples, which I hope you have downloaded somewhere, at least so that you can look at the files, look at the folders, look at the names of the files, and look at the contents of the files. This will all make more sense when you get a little farther down the road. So here is an ls statement, ls-l, DJ4E samples, and hello. This is within the folder DJ4E samples. There are two basic folders. One is in effect the project-wide settings, which is the same name as the folder that we're in. So it's DJ4E samples / DJ4E samples. And then there's the first application, which is hello. And there's a couple things here, like the __ init.py. You'll notice it's an empty file. It's just some bookkeeping that helps Python know that there are files that contain classes and objects in here. Settings.py and urls.py and wgsi.py is kind of like the traffic cop for this entire application that routes things coming into the right, this entire project that routes things to the right application. And then within the application we have some files. And you really are going to learn a lot about object-oriented programming because all these files contain objects. So Django is a large piece of software, and you change its behavior by defining objects that accomplish things and then in effect registering those objects. So a common thing will be to take something like admin.py or models.py, create a data model, and then tell the admin user interface that you didn't write how to show your model, and so you write stuff in admin.py to communicate into the admin user interface how your data model that Django currently knows nothing about is supposed to be shown, etc., etc. And so there's a lot of files, and we will talk through these files. Now, this is an example of a request response. It's a web application, and so what we'll talk about is once a request makes it into the server, it's going to do some work and then produce a response. But in that, we're going to look at all of the work that goes back and forth. And there's effectively like a routing step where it picks what part of your application to route this request to. There is a view part, which is going to receive it and potentially store data. Some would call that the model. The storing of the data is certainly the model, but the receiving of the possibly new input data, like you're going to create a new thing, that would be the model. And then the view, at some point you got to finish it and send something back out. And that's the purpose of the view. We call this pattern for building web applications, model view controller. And it's not like you can't build applications any other way. It's just by saying, it's a terminology that I can say going forward, that's the model, that's the view, and that's a controller function. And you don't have to know it right now, but these are words that they're loaded and have valuable meaning to us to be able to do. So at some point in this picture on the left side, we have a browser. DOM stands for the Document Object Model. And at some point, the person clicks somewhere in the current web page they're looking at, and the web browser intercepts that and says, oh, okay, I've got your click right here. The web browser intercepts it and then makes a socket connection across the internet, which we've seen before, and then does a GET request. And that is what then goes into the server. And so the three functions are the routing, the views, and the models. And there is an overall configuration file, the settings.py, which is sort of how you just say, oh, here's my view files, read these view files, read these model files. So the settings.py kind of controls everything. But when a request first comes in, it consults urls.py, and then for the project, and then it will include urls.pys from each of the applications. So once it's chosen what view to run, it looks at the URL, pulls out the pieces of the URL, and finds the views in views.py. That's a Python file that has the destinations for these incoming URLs. There's a file called forms.py, which we'll see later, that is used to make the forms aspect, the part that you fill in, as pretty as possible. And then we take the resulting data that we're going to send back and we merge that in through what's called a template. And then if there's any data that we need stored, we call the model and we store that in a database. And there's this file called model.py, which informs how we store data in the database. And then when that's all done, we read potentially new data from the database, merge that into a template, and then send a response back to the browser, and then that response is all shown to the end user. And so that really is the request into the server through a Django application, pulling data from various places, merging a template back in, and then sending a response back to the application. So up next, we're going to talk about virtual hosting. Now, in general, you're not going to have to worry about this. It just kind of explains how something like Python Anywhere is able to manage a whole lot of domains on a single system.